Previously on Ty's Hot Mess History. The one who wasn't happy was Madeleine. She didn't like the publicity that she and her husband had been getting on this trip to Italy. All of the papers were really playing up the fact that he would wander about and do as he pleased without his wife. I can understand why she didn't like that, even if it was true, and it was. The news stories were also talking about how much Enzo loved his son, Giovanni. She didn't like that either. That is one part about Madeleine that I just do not like. She really had a problem with the fact that Enzo loved his son. It seems like she just wanted him to be so mesmerized by her money that he would forget that he had a whole family before he met her. Her problem with the way that she was being reported on during the Italian fiasco was that she was being called, quote, an American millionairess who is jealous. Well, if the shoe fits. But in less than 2 weeks' time, Madeleine would be smiling again because she was going to use the one thing that she had that kept her husband crawling back to her: her money. She would give his wife another 5-figure payday in exchange for Enzo in a once-and-for-all no-backsies deal. And she would buy Enzo a brand new car in exchange for some affection from him. For a few days. So now it's time for Money Bags Madeleine to shell out some dough so that she can keep that hunk of a man who hates her guts. She snuck onto his ship when she found out that he was on his way to Italy. At this point in February of 1935, everybody was in Italy. Enzo, his first wife and son, and Madeleine. And it was looking like Enzo was going to have to stay longer than he planned because the Italian government was holding his passport. The reason that he was given was that Italy was not going to recognize his divorce from his first wife, Tosca. Instead, they would charge him with bigamy and lock him up in prison. Usually, a problem for Enzo meant a problem for Madeleine, but she was actually okay with the idea of his being locked away because at least in prison, there wouldn't be any other women she'd have to compete with for his affection. I'm not even joking. Check out this headline from the Buffalo News. Enzo's wife fearful of U.S. girls' wiles. Therefore, Madeleine planned to keep her lovely boy, as she called him, away from New York. Sounds like a great plan to me. Let's get into it. But first, if you like these videos about the most scandalous people from yesteryear who make Ty's Hot Mess History a time capsule for the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know every time that I upload one of these videos or every time that I live stream. And hit that like button to support this video. Thank you. Now, on to why you are here. All that Madeleine wanted was to live in peace with her lovely boy, who she also called a god and a Greek statue. But the pesky young girls just wouldn't leave him alone and let him be faithful. Luckily for her, the Italian authorities had locked him up so that no women could get to him. Not even his lawful wife, Tosca. Wait a minute, doesn't that make Madeleine a paranoid hypocrite? I think that it does. She was lucky to have him behind bars, and he was lucky that she had a lot of money. She would end up sticking by his side and paying to get him out. Literally just one day and $17,000 later, Enzo's problems were solved. Tosca settled on 200,000 lira as a settlement to make the divorce a reality. I guess that she liked big round numbers. That's a little more than $375,000 in today's currency that Madeleine shelled out to get her man back. But she wasn't done spending. Of course she had to get him a little treat for all of his trouble. So she bought him a brand new fancy sports car, and the couple made plans to leave Italy and ride off into the sunset with France as their next destination. Cannes, to be exact. While they were waiting on Enzo's passport to be returned, which took a few days, another interesting thing occurred when Madeleine entertained Tosca, aka Mrs. Piemonte No. 1, for tea at her luxurious hotel. I'm sure that Enzo loved that. Unfortunately for us nosy Mestorians, Enzo's mother also attended this tea, and all of the quotes in the papers are from her. It's the same old stuff. She liked Enzo's new rich wife. She knew that Madeleine was older than her son, but she seemed the same age as her son. She seemed really young. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever you say, Mom. Just keep those dollars rolling into the family, right? But we do get this interesting description of Tosca. She's called the fighter's sturdy, black-haired first wife, who comes from Italian peasant stock. Ouch. Now, I have to take just a quick moment to defend Tosca. This photo of her was used almost all of the time in the newspapers, but in March of 1935, I saw this photo. Clearly, she used some of that money that Madeleine paid her to get a makeover, but in all of my research, I only saw this photo of her once, but I digress. What happened on March 9th more than makes up for the snooze fest printed in the papers about the two wives meeting. Well, Enzo took Madeleine to France in that new car she got for him, and this subheadline summed up what happened next rather succinctly. Enzo Fioramonte, dapper Italian prize fighter, and his second wife, Mrs. Madeleine Force Astor Dick Fioramonte, made a hasty exit out a side door of their hotel today when Enzo's first wife, Tosca, roared into town on the Rome Express, volubly proclaiming she had come to reclaim him. Okay, so here's what happened. Madeleine and Enzo called themselves going on honeymoon number 2. So they were getting ready to step out for the evening to do the Riviera. Well, Tosca had taken a train to France to track them down, and she did just that. Why? Because she wanted her man back. You see how the papers followed and printed their every move. So Tosca knew their hotel, so she thought. But they switched their plans and went to a different hotel, and she still tracked them down. When she arrived at the hotel, she demanded the front desk staff to allow her entry to Enzo's suite. They flat out denied her request, as they should have. She explained to the workers in what was described as strong language that she had come to collect her man, regardless of the money that his wife had paid her and would continue to pay her. She argued back and forth with them for a while, but they never gave her access to Enzo's room. So she settled for a room as close to their suite as she could get. Now, this was not a quiet conversation that she was having with the hotel staff, so Enzo and Madeleine could hear everything. So, as Tosca was settling into her room so that she could wait for an Enzo appearance in the hallway in the middle of the night, he and Madeleine slipped out of a side door of the building, got into his new car, thank goodness it was a race car, and they made their escape. Again, I ask, what was it about this man? Meanwhile, on the very same day as all of this commotion, Enzo's lady friend, the one who he was saying goodbyes to when he left for Europe, thinking that Madeleine didn't know, Adela Rogers St. John, her husband was trying to divorce her because of her affiliation with Enzo Fioramonte. One of the hardest parts for me to understand in this story is why a woman who had been married to 2 millionaires, one of them among the richest men in the world, would drain her bank account to be in a marriage like this one. Anyway, they were on the run. They got away from wife number 1. Meanwhile, Enzo had lied to the press about ever having seen his first wife in Italy, or that he had ever been charged with bigamy, even though all of this had been very well documented. Maybe someone could have found all of the drama that surrounded Enzo to be exciting, but all of this seems like way too much for a normal person to bear, and Madeleine just appeared to be aging by the second. Her friends were starting to feel sorry for her and her crazy life. They were commenting on how her beauty was just gone. And according to the few society friends that were still willing to allow her to come around, Enzo was starting to demand money from her and beat her. That was their norm for the next 2 years. Then in July of 1937, Enzo put his hands on someone else, a man this time. He loved driving his sports cars fast. That earned him a speeding charge. Well, he never answered the charge. The charge was from 1934, 3 years before. He was just irresponsible. God knows that Madeleine had the money to pay for the ticket, and she would have paid for it if he had told her about it. So he ended up getting sentenced to 5 days at Rikers Island prison. At his sentencing, the press was there, just like they had been for every moment of his life since he had been with Madeleine. He should have expected it. But when reporters were questioning him about being sentenced, he punched one of the cameramen twice, landing a left and a right far more successfully than he had been able to do in the boxing ring. I guess that he would have won more fights if his opponents had been holding big cameras and they were not expecting him to hit them. Enzo showed up hours late to this court date, and the judge wasn't having it. That's why he was sentenced to time behind bars. The judge didn't even offer an alternative like paying a fine, and he told Enzo, among other things, quote, "Foreigners like you should not flout the law," end quote. Well, I guess that was 5 days of rest for Madeleine. And she needed it, because according to her handful of friends, Enzo spent the second half of 1937 beating her more frequently and taking more of her money. They said that he broke her wrist and broke her ribs. She was always in bed recovering from one of his attacks. He eventually, on one occasion, quote, beat her senseless, unquote, and that is what caused their final separation, initiated by Madeleine. In May of 1938, Madeleine was staying in Palm Beach and finally decided to go a step further than the separation and file for divorce. She did so on the grounds of extreme cruelty, citing that he, 1, had knocked her down, and I didn't know if that was in reference to the incident before they got married in which he broke her arm, but 2, broke her wrist, 3, hit her with a fist after a dance, and 4, was exceedingly unpleasant. Now, I said that I wasn't sure what Madeleine meant about her charge that Enzo had once knocked her down. As we know, he knocked her down to the floor and broke her arm before they got married, remember? She was in the hospital recovering from the broken arm when she said "I do" to him. Well, I first learned about her accusations against Enzo in a book that I will list in my sources for this video series, so I didn't have the specifics. Well, that led me to do some digging, and this is what I found. This article that was printed in the Daily News Sunday edition on June 12, 1938, called "Enzo Beat Her," says Rich White. And I'm going to share several passages with you from this article in part 6. But here's a quick spoiler. The charge about being knocked down had nothing to do with the incident from before they got married. He had a long history of beating on her, and we will get into that in the conclusion of this series when I bring you part 6. In the meantime, Enzo Fioramonte wasn't the only boxer who had a history of beating women. So did Jack Johnson, the man who was revered as the first black heavyweight champion. I published a 2-part story about him. You can see the first part here. I will also leave a link to it in the description box. This video has been brought to you by me. Well, my Patreon is a sponsor for this video. If you like these dirty scandals on my channel, then you'll love my Patreon, Ty's Too Hot Hot Mess History. It has all of the stuff that I can't talk about or show here because it's just too hot, too violent, too sexual, too graphic, too much. Come and join us there for the hot mess history. The link is in the description box.